your best isn't good enough, right?
You're so deep in the forest, sometimes you can't see the trees.
Your best now may not be your best in the future.
Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Kurkowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go. Rick Mayo is one of my favorite people to talk fitness and business with. He first started Alloy Fitness back in 1992 and has went from trainer to business owner to licensee to franchise developer. Rick was one of the first pioneers in developing training-specific fitness centers and continues to lead from the front. And this March, he and his team celebrated opening their 100th franchise, so I thought it would be a perfect time to have him come back on the podcast. So there are 5 key lessons learned in reaching 100, and Rick details and explains each of these lessons in this episode. And the way Rick speaks on his vision and what it takes to develop it transcends fitness and business, and it's applicable to virtually any pursuit of a goal in life. So with that, let's get right to it. If you like this episode, you want to show the podcast some love, please rate and review it wherever you're listening to, and don't forget to subscribe. Catch all new episodes that are going to be dropped every single week for you. All right, thank you very much. Now let's get to the show. All right, let's have some fun. Rick Mayo, good to see you, man. Thanks for coming back.
Hey, likewise, Michael. Thanks for having me. I was excited when you reached out. It's been a minute.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you doing that. I mean, you hit another big milestone here. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, we're notoriously terrible at celebrating wins, but I think we're trying to come up with some rules because I know that it's good for the team, right? Like I don't care because I have a really big vision, and so to me, I fully anticipated getting here in some way, shape, or form. Sort of that Stockdale paradox where like things are hard, but you ultimately know that you're going to get there, right? And you're going to be better off for it. So like that's my mindset, but I have to keep in mind I've got a whole bunch of people on my team that probably would like to celebrate some wins. So I'm trying to figure out some sort of frameworks or guardrails around like, maybe was it a 24-hour rule? Like, well, what do we do? Like, do we high five for this long and then get back to work? I've got to figure out something. We've got some old stale bottles of very expensive champagne in the fridge at work. And it's like, we haven't even touched them yet. It's like, all right, we should probably bust those open, but I just hesitate to do it because as you know, there's the fear of like losing that momentum, right?
100,
like,
absolutely.
What are we celebrating? Like, we're not even close. Our goal's 800 locations by 2030. It's like, we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but I could get better, we'll admit, at celebrating wins. So thank you. It was a good milestone. And we, kind of went around the table at our meeting and just gave props to the team. So I think that's enough for now.
No doubt. Well, you're spoken like a absolute true entrepreneur there, Rick. Onward and upward. But it's funny. The last time we talked, I had you on the podcast was a little over a year ago when it was another milestone, 30 years of Alloy. You started in 92 and that was 2022. And now from what I explained probably in the intro here is 100 franchises awarded. This was back in March. I know you guys are even more over there, like 115 or so, but it is, it's like, I'm sure it is something where you have a big vision, you want to get there, but also it is, hitting triple digits, how much work, not just work on your own self, but from a team standpoint, like it's probably like, you don't want to let your foot off the gas pedal, but also it's like, you got to stop and celebrate. It's like Ferris Bueller's line, right? Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around every once in a while, you might miss it.
That's right. I'm so happy that you appreciate Ferris Bueller's Day Off movie because I can remember, I forget how old I am and, you still feel really relevant and young. And, I still do speak in the fitness industry a good bit. Mm-hmm. And I can remember asking a question to a crowd and you'll remember the famous line in there when he was absent for class and the professor's like, Bueller, Bueller, like really flat, right? And he's not answering. So I asked a question, nobody answered. And I did that. And everyone's looking around like, who is he talking to? They're looking for some guy named Bueller. I'm like, all right, clearly no one's seen the movie in this crowd, right? It's like, that's when you've aged yourself. When I'm saying Bueller, and they're looking around for a guy named Bueller. I'm like, okay, never mind. This is the wrong crowd.
Yeah, I did that. I did that to a few teenagers I worked with. I gave a Goonies reference on there of sloth, love, chunk. and it was looking at me like I had 3 heads, and I was like, oh my God. And like, it was one of those moments like, wow, dude, your dorky analogies of movies are for certain generations. And you need to find the new stuff that's coming out
That's
there.
right. That's right. Watch a newer movie, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, again, I mean, when I reached out to you, I thought this, I mean, I'm sure going from any venture, you've been doing this business for a long time, over 30 years now in this business. You've seen numerous successes from opening up first brick and mortar, being really a pioneer in the boutique fitness world, to now going into the franchisee mode. I'm sure there's an evolution behind it. And I guess my first question I'd love to ask is, going the franchise route. I mean, you were already very successful in building a business kind of in brick and mortar. I know you went into the licensing. What was the reason behind wanting to go the franchise route? Was it almost just kind of the inevitable thing of being an entrepreneur and having a vision, or was there kind of a different purpose behind it?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, and one that people ask. And the first time I was asked it, it caused me to reflect. And I think ultimately, a couple of things at play. One being, like, from altruistically, it's a better vehicle for success, I believe. In our licensing journey, I had the distinct advantage of sitting on the board for some really big fitness franchises, largest in the world. I mean, imagine like 4,000 or 5,000 locations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really got to see the impact of putting all your energy into one brand and all rowing in the same direction. Whereas in licensing, we were working with everyone from CrossFit to large family tennis centers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a little bit scattershot, right? It was great. It was great business, but I saw the power in putting all of those efforts. At one point I had a fitness education business, a coaching business, like a mastermind, a licensing, and I was sort of dabbling in all these things. And I'm like, wow, if I took all those collective efforts and put them into one brand and we were all going in the same direction, that could be super powerful, right? So there was that. And then, I mean, honestly, from a financial standpoint, we had a few people make a run at buying our licensing business, and it became readily apparent based on the structure of the deals and the valuation that, when you're just selling IP without any type of like really contractual agreement, or just the way, say, franchising works as opposed to just licensing alone,
Right.
There's just not as much enterprise value, honestly, in a licensed business as there is in a franchise. So it's like, well, if it's a more successful, vehicle for the end user, which is both the customer and the franchisee, and there's more enterprise value for my efforts for me, then it's probably a win-win, right? And that's really why we did it. And we didn't. I mean, you think about it; it took 30 years almost, to make that decision. So we didn't approach it lightly. And I think, as we've entered franchising now, the stakes are higher. It's like, I've slowly upskilled myself over 30 years 1 million times. I mean, trainer, brick and mortar owner, multiple brick and mortar owner, consulting, speaking, licensing, franchising. Each one of those required a completely different skill set and mindset from me. And so it doesn't happen quickly, right? I mean, it took 28 years to get there. And when you look at a lot of franchises, they might be built on, I have Rick's hamburger shop, we have a line out the door, we should franchise this. But you really don't know. I mean, like, what kind of market are you going to go into?
Right.
Do better in the suburbs or city center, right? Mm-hmm. Like, who's your customer avatar? And we had a lot of those things dialed in just from loads of experience. So it gave us a unique perspective approaching franchising. As it turns out, now that we're in it, it's a very compelling story, because we could be seen as what's known as an emerging franchise, which are relatively new to the franchise space.
Okay.
But yet, based on our track record and having worked with other big franchises and our track record of the fitness industry in general, it's a compelling story. So it really helps to mitigate the sort of concern around, am I working with a brand new, a franchise that just brand new to fitness and franchising? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, right? A lot of companies do that, and more power to them. If you get a bunch of VC money and fund some project and you've got some slick technology that your whole concept's based around and you want to take that to market, that's great. Mm-hmm. As the franchisee, the purchaser of that, I would be concerned about that if it didn't have a long track record and some legitimacy in the leadership team around, what have you done in this space to be able to know that this is a relevant offering that's going to be well received in these markets, right?
Sure.
So I think, really long answer, but I think that's why both the vehicle for success for the franchisee and the end users in their community, the clients, if you will, and then for us, the enterprise value of a franchise is just much greater. And to your point, it's sort of the evolution of a entrepreneur. It's like, each time that my skill set improved, that gave me the opportunity to move into a better opportunity vehicle, which would be more lucrative. And I think if you don't do that, you run the risk certainly of just sort of, running out of runway. And I'm not really sure that would fuel, what I do, why I wake up and get to work every morning is I need a big, ridiculous, far-reaching goal to shoot for.
Right.
And that is very compelling, right? That's a great reason to get up and hustle.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about like, getting to a goal and then maintaining it and like sustaining that strength. We hear about that all the time with clients. I want to just get here and maintain. But I think we kind of know maintain doesn't mean you stay where you're at. Like, especially with the mind that you have, it's like you kind of constantly need to challenge yourself. It means you have that growth mindset. So that's what I figured that was kind of it. Like, it's kind of the inevitable step of, all right, I've kind of conquered this part of myself. Now I need to continuously challenge myself into another thing. But I thought it was interesting, Rick, you said like all these different transitions from trainer to business owner to entrepreneur. In your mind personally, is there one transition that seems like it jumps out at you that was maybe the most challenging of going from one to the other?
Not really. I think for where I was, skill set wise, maturity, all the things. I think each one was now in hindsight, some of them seem ridiculous that I had any fret over any of those steps. Oh wow, I'm going to open one facility, right? But look, at the time, you're putting everything on the line, and you've never hired people and scaled a team and learned to move out of working in the business, right, and working on the business and all the cliche things, but they're all true. I think each one was just as stressful in relationship to where I was at the time. And so certainly now the stakes are really big, more so than ever, but I don't think it's any more stressful now. If anything, it's a little bit less stressful because like you've just done it enough times.
Right.
And even though I was as comfortable going from trainer to facility owner and putting my name on a lease guarantee at 22 years old, that was very stressful. Mm-hmm. But, I think it just prepares you along the way. And to your point, I think, what makes you happy as you're on your entrepreneurial journey as well is like, you want to aim as high as you can possibly conceive, and then bring everything that you have, tool wise and energy to bear, right? Everything to bear towards that goal. To me, that makes me really happy. And I can be working like crazy hard, or I don't know, there's just something about that is so compelling. And maybe that's just that hardwiring of entrepreneurship, right? Sure. That to me is the most compelling thing. And so none of those steps felt any less stressful than any of the others, because at that point in time, it was the biggest thing that I had done, if that makes sense.
Right. It's interesting. I heard about like the difference that your body reacts the same way, whether you're nervous or excited. The same chemicals come out in your body. It's the same exact, biology makeup that happens. The only thing that difference is your perspective. It's like, am I really excited about this, or am I nervous? It's just about what's going on in your mind. And it's tough. It's easy to say. And I think the more you build those reference points up of it, it's like all of a sudden you get more risk, more tolerant to risk of taking it. Like, the stakes are higher, but it's really the same risk as when you were 22 years old, just getting started in this business.
Well, maybe it's like, in the spirit of being in the fitness industry, maybe it's like a muscle, right? Where you can just build it up over time. And so, in that reference, maybe you're lifting more weight, right? Or lifting more load, but you're kind of doing the same things you were early on. And even though that load felt really heavy when you first started, you look back on it, it wasn't, but it's no different than the heavier load that you're trying to lift at this point in time, So I think it's a similar analogy, but you nailed it.
Yeah. So you and your COO, Suzanne, recently just did a podcast about like kind of the 5 big lessons learned in opening these first 100s. Great topic. You guys really dove deep into those. And listeners, I tell you to go listen to that podcast in full. It was awesome what Rick and Suzanne did. What I'd love to do is kind of dive into those a little bit more with you on it, because I had a few questions behind it. So the first one that you put out there is purpose is really important. And the first thing I thought, and you actually nailed it right as I thought about it, is like, it seems very self-evident, like you seem like you should learn this in here, but still it's kind of like, it's something that you learn maybe even deeper down the line from there. Like, is this something that was just kind of a deeper lesson that you learned as it was going, or like, was it like a new like aha moment or like epiphany that made you realize that purpose is this important?
Yeah, I think ultimately what happens, and when you're in a business for a long time, you maybe lose, you don't lose the ultimate why, because look, if we weren't doing fitness, it's like, one of our core values is humor with a touch of crazy. We always say like, it's fitness, like let's have some fun. We could be investment bankers if we wanted to bore ourselves to death and make money, right? So I think, but what really reminded me of purpose being so important, even though I knew it, was hearing it from all the candidates, right? And so if you can imagine the ideal alloy candidate, there's a certain threshold of net worth that you have to have. You have to have a certain amount of liquid capital on hand, because you've got to open a brick and mortar business, and there's just certain things. So people that are in that situation, typically they're either very successful at a young age, and we've got some younger franchisees, of course, but most of them kind of fall into the same customer avatar as our customers, which are sort of like 45 to 65, tired of corporate, looking for that next go around. And almost to a person, everyone will say, first of all, can I get return on investment? Because if you can't get that, then there's no point in even taking something to franchising, and they're not going to buy it anyway, right? But once you can answer that question, then it becomes about purpose. And to a person, everyone is so excited to say, I worked in corporate and I made these widgets and I was just a cog in a machine, and I didn't really understand how what I was doing was making a difference in the world. This is something that I can really understand, what I'm doing, making a difference for people. And so when I just kept hearing it over and over, and I think for me, it was the realization that I was surprised, which seems odd, because that's also why I do what I do ultimately. But like in franchising, it's like two separate businesses, man. You're in the fitness business and you're in the franchise business. And so we're really good at the fitness business. We're learning the franchise business, and the franchise business is the same, whether I'm franchising, water or fitness as an example. Right. And so you can get bogged down in the minutia of the litigious nature of franchising, or, you're in meetings and contracts. And I mean, it's just, there's a lot of like heavy lifting on that side of the house. So you just kind of get further away from the end product. Right. And so sometimes it takes the people that are interested in it speaking back to you how passionate they are about having something in their life that has purpose, and it reignites that excitement in you. And that was sort of the realization. It's like, wow, everybody that comes to, say, Discovery Day, which is the last step in the sales process, and we get to break bread and sit down and have dinner, they all just go on and on about how great it is. And they can't believe that they would have the opportunity to get into a business that has purpose. And I've been doing it for 31 years. So of course I'm like, well, duh. Yeah. I mean, whatever. Anyway, let's talk about this. Right. And so I think maybe shame on me, but I think when I thought about it, it also reminded me of like, we used to do accredited internships. And I just took for granted how long we've been doing what we're doing and how many systems we had in place. And so you bring in these young interns and they're just so excited about the thing, right? And their excitement actually excites you. And that's how it's been in franchising. It's like, oh, other people's excitement about having the opportunity to own and run a business that has purpose has reignited my, passion for what we do, because it's easy to forget when you're just, blocking and tackling all day, every day. And so, yeah, it was almost one of those duh realizations where I'm like, well, duh, of course people want to have purpose in their lives. That's why I do what I do. But I'd gotten so far from that at times that it was nice to have them remind me, if that makes sense.
Right. It is funny because I think so many people get into the fitness business because of that deeper meaning. There's a million other industries where you can make a lot of money really fast and go the financial route. Fitness has not always been that one for a bit. You can make a great living. You can keep going onward and upward in, many different ways. But it's funny, Rick, I remember when I was a manager at a company, I was there for like 10 years and, saw so much different success and all this stuff, but you're so deep in the forest, sometimes you can't see the trees. And I had an old mentor who kind of told me, is like, all the stats that we had, we have, 2,000 people that are training here. They're paying, some up to $700-800 a month, like all this stuff that's going on in here. Yet the brand new person that's walking into the club, they don't know any of that. So the only thing they know is the smile at the front desk and how you first greet them and you make them feel. It's like, and it was like, we were training the front desk. He's like, never forget that first impression. They don't get to learn any of that other stuff of how awesome this place is if you don't get this right. And it was one of those like sit back moments when I was like, oh yeah, like always go back to what was that first day when you were just so excited to talk to everybody about this fitness and this purpose. It's easy when you get experience to move off of that a little bit just because you have more things that you're dealing with on an everyday basis when you get more responsibilities. But It is.
Yeah.
I could see how that's, just a lesson that you probably relearn over and over again.
Well, it's funny because a byproduct of that lesson is it's reignited my excitement. So when we have discovery day and I'm talking to people, or like say we're running a training week, we had like 15 people in for training last week, which is when clubs come to corporate to get their training before they launch their pre-sale, always jump in parts of the training. And I'm just, everyone always says, yeah, I can't believe you've been doing this for 31 years. Like, I'm so excited about all the tools that we have and the success that we can have in the market. But that's been reignited through getting into franchising and hearing the candidates and how excited they are. And I'm like, oh yeah. And so I would say it's been very helpful for me selfishly going into franchising, because to hear how excited everyone is to have purpose reignited kind of the whys behind what we do. And then as of late, man, it's just oozing, right? And then you find like, well, what a more compelling, like, who do you want to be the most excited person? It's like the founder, right? The guy who founded the company, who's been doing it for 31 years. I still have more energy and excitement about it than anyone else on my team. And people like almost tease me about it because they're like, okay, more of that. And like Matt, who's he's our VP of like club operations. And he's like, yeah, and he's been doing it for 31 years, and everybody will laugh and they'll say, don't ever lose that. That's amazing. And you forget how magnetic that can be too. I mean, forget about it in sales, sure. But I think, it's just a very compelling way to operate in the world, right? And it's been really helpful for me to get back to that core root of why we do what we do.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's that word you said there, magnetic. It is, because so many people you see like, oh, somebody's been in a job for so long. It's like inevitably you think that they're burnt out. When you see somebody that's more excited on the things that they do, 3 decades down the line, it's almost it makes you sit back and be like, man, they must be doing something right.
Yeah, well, and if you think about, ultimately, I'm not doing it for this reason, but if you think about someone sitting there who's got a worry, right? And they do, like, listen, a lot of franchising for the candidates is just mitigating risk, and they feel like they're crazy. They're getting into an industry they don't really know that much about. They're getting out of like corporate, which is more stable in their minds. I would argue it's probably not, but whatever. But then when they see a guy like me, and clearly I have this raging passion after, like you said, 3 decades, they're like, I want that. What is that? Like, I want to wake up like that guy, because I don't have that at all for what I'm currently doing, right? And so in a strange way, it's really helps to draw, like you said, it's magnetic for people, right? They want to be around it. They want to experience it themselves. But it's not contrived, or, it's not faking. It's exactly how I feel. And there's no way you can fake that anyway. As you know, it just comes off corny if you do. So people know if you're really that way. And I'm that way all the time. Yeah. Like, and I do say, and I'll tell people, like, we always wrap up Discovery Day with like Bronnie, Ware's, the Australian hospice nurse, wrote the book, The 5 Wishes of the Dying. And the number one reason, imagine she worked as a hospice nurse for 3 decades. And she interviewed everyone in the last few weeks of their lives and would compile the answers to the questions, and then wrote a very simple book called The 5 Wishes of the Dying. But the number one wish, Michael, was, I'd wished I had the courage to live life on my terms as opposed to what others thought I should do. So imagine there, you're dying, and you're thinking, God, never took my shot, right? And so I think when people are sitting there and they have all this fear and worry, and they see someone standing in front of them that's done nothing but that, who's so excited, and I'll just say, look, it's my biggest wish that, like, you don't let your dream die inside of you. Like, this is it. Like, you can mitigate all the risk you want, but eventually, if you think we're a good culture fit and we like you back, then you've got to take your shot. And there's no better way to mitigate risk than to be in a franchise. And that's a fact. But I would love for you guys to experience what I'm feeling every day when I wake up, which is never dread, never don't want to do what I want to do. I'm always excited every single day. If you guys can experience that in your lives, you're really, blessed, I guess would be an overused word, but it is true. I
think it's the right word though. It's that I read that book a while ago, and it's one of those like, wow, like, because you think when you're in the middle of your life, you don't think that day is coming, but we're all going to get there at some point. And these are people that are telling it right from there. And that kind of segues a bit into number 2 that you said, which is helping entrepreneurs, through entrepreneurship. It made me think of the book by Stephen Covey, which is The 8th Habit. He's, popularized and known for the 7 habits of highly successful people. But he wrote another book, which is The 8th Habit, which he talks about finding your voice and then help others find them, find theirs, which is kind of about like abundance of coming out from there. With that, like with entrepreneurs, it's, we're in an age where an entrepreneur is cool. Like it's a cool term to have on there. It's like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I learned kind of the hard way, the difference between what a business owner is versus an entrepreneur. Like you kind of have to wear many hats from there. So when you're talking with people, is that kind of a little bit of the overarching kind of mindset of them? Like they think it's very cool, or are most of the people that you're talking to kind of really ready to tackle this and take this on?
I think a little bit of both, right? I think we try to do a really good job of preparing people to understand what it really means. It does get over glorified in a lot of ways. Again, it's sort of that idea that like, look, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be a struggle, and you're going to have some sleepless nights, and you may have to work more than you anticipated early on, or it does, I don't know, whatever, right? Like everybody has their different areas of weakness, if you will, and strengths. And so those are going to be tested, because like you're going to live or die by your decisions, that's it at the end of the day. I mean, you become an entrepreneur, when you point that finger at yourself, you're like, all right, this is up to me, right? Mm-hmm. And so franchise can certainly help. We can't make you successful. We certainly aren't going to make you not be successful. We're going to give you all these tools, but you got to go out and do it. Like, I think the best analogy I've heard is like, we're going to build a bicycle, and there's lots of types of bicycles. Those are different types of franchises, but I could build you the perfect bike with a basket and made out of these great materials. It's got great, components and everything on it. But at the end of the day, you have to get on it and pedal it. Like I can't pedal it for you. Right. So we try to do a good job of preparing people for that. But I try to explain the idea of what we're talking about aiming high and then bringing everything you have to bear towards that bigger goal, and how that's really the key to fulfillment in life. And when you reach it, you just move the goalpost and keep going. That's sort of how you have to be wired to be a successful entrepreneur. And so we try to set people up, better, right, for that mindset. And we give them tools like, we run EOS as a framework for, our corporate location. And then we teach that framework to franchisees, so they have some kind of scaffolding to kind of build their entrepreneurial muscles and skills around. But at the end of the day, like you just got to prepare them as best as possible. But I think there is some aspiration to looking at someone who's been doing it their whole life. And I'm not saying it's, I'm no different than anyone else. I've just been at it a long time. But to see still that amount of passion, right, that's still there, I think they look at that and go, yeah, there's just something there that I don't have that I would like to have, right? And I don't think I'm going to get it working in a huge company as the VP of, marketing or whatever those positions are. So yeah, I think it's somewhat aspirational. And I think I have a lot of passion for entrepreneurship. I think it's what we mentioned on our podcast is I love fitness, but I'm just as passionate about entrepreneurship. Most of my talks now, even though in the fitness space, are about how to level up and how to advance your career and mindset and all these things, because I think that's really key. If you want to stay in the fitness industry, you have to evolve, for our earlier points. And so it takes the two things I'm most passionate about, fitness and entrepreneurship, and combines them. And so I really enjoy it. Like I love it. And so a lot of people have asked, to your point, like, why don't you just do more corporate stores? Because without getting too in the weeds, we get a royalty, and the royalties of the top line gross revenue of a business. And so ours is relatively low, but, and I have to say this because it's franchising, the profit margin can be really high. And so if you think about it, if it doesn't cost a lot to open, and there's good revenue, but not crazy high revenue, but the margin on that revenue is really high, it actually makes a better ownership model. So you could argue that why didn't you just slowly open 50 corporate stores, because you would make a lot more money. And it's like, well, I could, but you could also do a bunch of franchises, grow faster with other people's capital. And in doing so, I get to scratch both of my passionate itches, one being fitness, the other being entrepreneurship. And I love to stand in front of a group of people, watch them, overcome their risk adverse, voice, take their shot and go and be successful. And, we've been at it long enough now to have people that are like, man, when I was 6 months in, I was like, wow, what have I done? And then at about 8-9 months, I started to figure it out. And a year into it, I'm so glad I did this. This is the most wonderful career and job I've ever had, helping people. It's like, awesome. I want more of that, selfishly. Right. And so I think that's where all that comes from.
I think it's smart. When I heard you say that on your podcast, I was like, oh, it kind of goes back to that first lesson of purpose. It's like you can scale super fast, you can go super quick. faster and bigger is not always the answer to it. It has to align with the purpose. Otherwise, it could be very short-lived. And then all of a sudden, if it's not aligning with you, the farther the branches grow, the farther away from the foundation it is. If that foundation is rocky, then eventually you're going to grow so much and the tree's going to tip over from there.
Yeah, perfect analogy. Yep, you're 100% right. And so, again, it's perfectly aligned with what our DNA is, which is both fitness and entrepreneurship. And so, I think it starts to manifest itself over time in the way you go about everything in your business, from the way that we feel about how we coach our franchisees and manage those relationships to, again, the enthusiasm around the training and the sales process and all this. I mean, it's a very simple, small brick and mortar business, but again, it's still complex for someone that hasn't done it, right?
Sure.
So yeah. Anyway, I could go on forever, but you get
no
it.
doubt.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. Well, talking about like setting those, those big, hairy, audacious goals that you have on there. Personally, for you, is that something that you always felt like was a part of you? Was it something that you kind of learned to do more from either experience or from mentors? And I guess the second part too is, are most of the people maybe right at the beginning, are they almost setting their goals too low, maybe from fear of trying to go too heavy? Like, cause I just know from personal experience, from talking to a lot of people too, like we hear those things, right? Oh, set your goals super high and stuff, but to actually do that, because it's so far out of reach, you're not that person now who's actually going to be that person in there. It could be a really challenging thing to do.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to be honest with you, like real talk for me, I used to be able to cobble together a lot of like half-baked things, right? Like, oh, I've got a coaching group. It's got a couple hundred clubs in it. I've got a fitness education company. I've got a licensing company. And I mean, like, if you just look at it, like, hey, what's my income? It's like, it was amazing. Amazing businesses, all of them, right? So not necessarily bad, but really what I knew in my heart of hearts and what I never really wanted to admit is I never went full in on one thing, right? And the reason was, if I'm honest, there's probably a little bit of fear in that, because like once you go all in on one thing at the expense of other things that are working just fine, you're giving up good to go for great, right? Well, now it's out there, like it's make or break. You've got one thing that you're holding on to and you bring everything you have to bear towards that one thing. If that doesn't work, Michael, that's a horrible thought, right? Because like, that's it. Like there's no other excuses that you can make about why you didn't get there. And if we're honest, I'm probably not too dissimilar, I can't imagine, from a lot of people where they don't really make that giant goal, because doing that would then give them the option to fail, right? So if you don't go for the big thing in your life, you don't have to expose yourself to what your limitations might be, and you just play safe, right? And you might, and look, just for some people, that might be just getting into a one brick and mortar space. And that's the thing, that's the BHAG, right? And over time, that may evolve, but I think not until the last few years, which think about it, 3 decades to figure this out, that I look back and say, wow, I was playing small. And if I'm honest, I was probably doing it on purpose, like self-sabotaging, because I didn't want to put all of my eggs in a basket, put my stake in the ground and say, this is where I'm going, and I'm going to bring everything I have to bear towards that goal. And if it doesn't work, then there's no one to blame but me. Whereas if I have a bunch of half-baked businesses, I can just sort of move the chess pieces around on the board at any given time, still create income for myself, but never really go full in, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's been an interesting revelation, to do that. So I don't know if people are not wired for that. I would imagine that I'm not that unique, like I said, and that there are people that are just afraid to do it, because once you do it, and it's not like, it's kind of like taking a goal and making it public, like even a weight loss goal, like you tell everyone, hey, I'm going to lose, 20 pounds. It's like, well, everybody knows, like if you don't do it, they're going to find out. Right. I think the stakes are even higher when you put all of your resources into one venture. And then everybody knows, like, if you don't work, you don't work. And that's scary. And so I didn't learn that for 3 decades, but now we're there and it feels amazing.
Yeah, it is too. It's like I've had some conversations with other coaches about this, that I think notoriously as a culture, we're just not very good at goal setting, actually how to set a goal. Like we kind of say it and then it's like we start doing it, but we don't go deeper. We get a couple layers underneath, because it's actually really scary to put out exactly what you want in there, because if it doesn't work out, then you've kind of just exposed yourself. It's very vulnerable
Right.
to do. And it's not really a tactics and strategies thing that you can do. It really has to be a mindset and actually go in to be like, okay, what do I, truly want? I remember, I think it was Oprah who said this about, like, speaking with the, top performers in the world. And it's like, what makes them different from the other ones? It's like they actually dove in to say, what do I truly want? And then went all in. It's a very scary thing, to do. And kind of like you said, you could be doing just fine with a lot of different things, but it's not aligning, again, back to what is the highest purpose, what's the deepest truth
Right.
that you have from there. And it's kind of, if you just keep saying it, like, just, know exactly what you want, align with your goals. And I talk about this now because it took me really until the last few months to even know exactly what I wanted to do with this business. Cause I had success in a lot of different ventures in health and fitness, and then realized I wanted to get into more of the mindset side, the spiritual connection side as well. And it was like, well, do you know about this? It's like, well, this is really what you want to do. Might as well go all in and figure it out. And from that, it's like, okay, the day is much different as you go. It seems like you have more energy, to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, finally, I'm in a vehicle that's like scary, and you're playing with the big dogs, and you're playing in an industry where it's like, multi-billions, billions and billions of dollars. So the stakes are higher. The people you hire are much smarter than you. Everything, and you just wonder, like, I don't know. It's just been a really interesting revelation, but I've fully enjoyed it. I don't think I've ever been in this engaged. Again, per what probably people are perceiving from me, is I've never been this engaged, and I'm 30 years in, and I'm kind of in the same business I've always been in. So it's like, on one hand, it's like, geez, you're doing the same thing. I'm literally in the same brick and mortar that I was in when I opened in 92. It's just now expanded, and it's our corporate office, which is weird. It's walk through the same front door. I've been walking through as a completely different person for a completely different purpose for 30 years. I'm a totally different person walking in the door now. Yeah. But it's been refreshing, I guess, would be the word, where you are finally bringing everything to bear towards a giant goal. And you know what I've realized too, Michael, and this might be good for people to hear, even if it doesn't work out, and I'm not going to put that out there because all indications are that we're going to kill it, right? I do mean that. But let's just say in a parallel world, things didn't, something, we had a hiccup or we did whatever. It doesn't matter. What's satisfying is that you did it, right? Is that you put the goal out there, you aimed as high as you could possibly conceive, you brought all your resources to bear towards that goal. Even if you don't get there, you're going to be better off if you do that. That's all I can say, because I'm well on my way. Early indications are amazing. We're not anywhere close to where I want to be, right? And by the time I get there, I'll probably have moved the goalpost anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I can tell you, I'm so much more engaged and I guess happy is a weird term, but happier doing it, like on that journey, finally having done it. And I think it's like you look back and you're like, geez, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? It's like, well, because you didn't, because you weren't ready. And at that time, maybe opening one facility was bringing everything you had to bear, and that's all you could conceive. And that's absolutely fine. Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is. So kind of going to the next one, which is kind of tough for some people to hear, but I believe that it's true as well. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. So there's this line, they say that, like, entrepreneurs are born, they're not, made. Do you believe in that? Do you think it's a teachable thing that you can do?
I think so. I think you have to have a certain amount of grit would be the way to, and what I mean by grit is, like, look, if things do get tough and don't go your way, and it's almost guaranteed to happen at some point in your entrepreneurial journey, that you have whatever it is that it built into you, your DNA, to buckle down and do what needs to be necessary to succeed. When I've heard this from a friend of mine in the industry, and he did this interesting sort of montage of ideas, but one of them was, your best isn't good enough, right? And that's hard for people to hear too, because, sometimes it's like, well, I'm doing my best. It's like, okay, the market is the true test of what your best is. It doesn't matter what you think. And if the market is telling you that your best is not good enough, you can either just make excuses and complain, saying, well, I did my best, there's something wrong with the market, as an example, or you can use it as an opportunity to make your best better than it is, right? So maybe if you upskill yourself, your best will be good enough. But the fact is, if you're currently not successful, and you feel like you're doing your best and you're honest about that, maybe that's not good enough. And that's the hard lesson I think for entrepreneurs to understand is like, people don't care. The market doesn't care. It's just a thing. It's like a litmus test. It's like the ultimate test of your will and your ability. And if it's telling you it's not enough, you can bitch and moan all you want and make excuses. But at the end of the day, it's not emotional. It doesn't care about you personally. It doesn't care what you feel. It's just telling you it's not good enough. And so how you respond to that is really what makes you an entrepreneur or not, which is point the finger at your own chest and say, okay, well, I do think I'm doing my best. Clearly that's not enough. So where are some things, where's some areas of my life or my skill set that I can upskill so that my best is good enough? And the market will tell me that it's good enough. And that can be in a million ways. Like if we have a club that doesn't have great retention, that's what we hang our hat on. If we have a club, an open facility that has less than our target retention, you can say what you want about all the things you're doing, and we're doing all the things that you give us. And I'm like, you're not. It's no possible way, because your clients are telling you that you're not, right? Mm-hmm. Period. Doesn't matter what you tell me, the fruits and the result, period. And so you have to get better. I mean, it's a hard lesson to learn, but the entrepreneurs that do well, they understand that, they accept that message, and they use it as an opportunity to upskill, and ones that aren't will just typically wilt. And it's almost like the analogy that we use sometimes is like I have kids that are grown, but when you tell your kids that they're successful, say in math, and you say that they're successful when they're young, and you're like, oh, you're so great at math, you're so talented. And that becomes the message about why they're good at a subject like math. That's a terrible thing to do to a child, because when they get to a point, and they will, or they run into something challenging, even if it's calculus 2 or whatever that is, and they aren't good, they're going to automatically assume that they're not good because they don't have enough talent. Like they've run out of runway for talent. Whereas if you tell them, hey, you're really good because you work hard at this, right? And their answer to any kind of a challenge is just to buckle down and work harder and try to get better. Then when they run into these roadblocks and challenges, their answer will be, well, I need to, again, in this case, upskill myself in math as an example. Right. As opposed to like, that's why I hesitate to say like an entrepreneur is either born or they're not. It's like, okay, yeah, but there's still levels to the game, right? Right. Like you can be risk adverse, but you can also be a crazy person that does drugs and likes to skydive, while you're high. It's like, okay, that's risk adverse, but in a poor way. Exactly. But can you combine all those things, right? There's levels to it. And at some level, you have to understand that like, if you're not getting the result you want, there's nobody to blame but you. And you have to do the work to upskill, as opposed to saying, well, this isn't for me. And then you just sort of wilt right under that pressure. And so it kind of goes back to like, well, what's the answer to the roadblocks? Because you're going to have them. And if the grit again is in you and your answer is, well, I upskill and I work harder, then you're going to be just fine. If you're not wired that way, you're going to struggle. Right. It's so interesting that word talent, right? It's a fickle word right there, because it's like you think that it's just this natural thing that you're born with. Maybe you have some tendencies to go down there, or you think certain ways, but it's true. As soon as you face some adversity, you think, oh, my talent's run out. I can't do this anymore. I've and then you have no solutions. It's like, you can't work harder because you just don't have the talent. Well, it's interesting what you said, like doing your best versus doing what's required. And I think it's, I think inherently, like if you're relying on that excuse of, well, I did my best and it's this and this, it's like probably inherently in your mind, that you didn't do your best, because your best is not a set point, right? You don't get to a level and like your best is just, this is where it's at. It's like if you play basketball and you're decent, but then you practice every day, well, your best from today versus a year from now after that is going to be vastly different. That's why. And it's like, looking at, okay, what is required? I talk about this with people who are just getting into a fitness journey, right? It's like, doing your best. Yeah, well, you kind of don't know what your threshold is right now. We got to find where that is. Like, so just doing it, just kind of head down and just get the discipline, just get it done. We're going to figure out where that threshold is. We're going to find these things that you can work with when we talk about things like intuition, intuitive training and stuff. Yeah, that's a skill that you develop and you kind of graduate to in the same way. But if you're at the beginning steps of a journey and it's something you haven't done yet, okay, what are the requirements? All right, I'm going to do these the absolute best I can.
And then if you do get to that point where you've given all your effort and it's still not working, it's probably a little easier in your mind to be like, okay, like, yeah, I absolutely did my best. This isn't for me. And you can swallow that a little easier.
Right. Yeah. But
Yeah.
to your point, I think the point that you made that I really liked is your best is sort of a moving target. Like your best now may not be your best in the future, but I mean, you're always bringing your best to bear. But I guess the point is there's like some honesty in being in a business where maybe your best isn't, the market's telling you it's not good enough. Well, how are you going to respond to that?
Yeah.
Are you going to try to make your best better than it is currently by upskilling yourself, practicing every day is your point? Or are you just going to wilt and say, well, I guess it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I think that's that little, bit of grit that really will make you, I think, a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah. So the next one you have is setting the right expectations. I had a question on this one because I think this is so valid. When you went into this, did you set the expectations too low for people, or did you set the expectations too high of what you were going to do versus what they're expected to do? I'm assuming this could be a really kind of tough dance to navigate.
It can, and I think what we did is we set their expectations too low for what they would have to do and too high for what we were going to do, right? And you didn't realize it until you started getting requests for things that anybody else in franchising would say is, okay, that's crazy. Like, can you hire my people, or can you come and train these people for me? And, it's like, we were surprised. Maybe, now we will set better expectations, but surprised at the time thinking, well, it's your business. Like, why would you expect us to do that? That's crazy. But then in hindsight, I'm like, oh, well, I know why they did, because we do a lot. I mean, we do have a really comprehensive package put together, but imagine if the message was like, you just signed the agreement. We're going to send real estate agents into your market. We're going to find you a viable space. We're going to approve it corporately. Then we're going to send in our construction team and they're going to handle everything. And all you have to do is get on a weekly meeting and just deploy capital when you need to and check things off. But we're going to handle everything behind the scenes, right? But at some point, you get through like a pre-sale or whatever, and then like it's over. And then we're going to be like, here's your business. It's kind of like somebody handing you a baby without having like conceived it or, gone through 9 months of building it, so to speak. And then they just hand it to you like, here, you have a baby now. And it's like, oh my gosh, so we did a poor job of setting those expectations in that regard. And so now doing a better job of saying, it's your business at the end of the day. And we can, like, again, the bicycle analogy, I can give you the perfect bicycle, but if you don't get on and pedal it, you're not going to go anywhere. And I'm not going to prevent you from being successful, but I also can't make you successful, right?
Yeah.
And so I think early on, we were just trying to make it seem as seamless as possible. And we do have this great comprehensive sort of package of soup to nuts, everything put together, but we overstated how easy that was going to be. And when it got tough, of course, expectations are everything. We noticed people were like, well, wait a minute. Like, are you guys doing this? It's like, no, we don't do that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's our fault. So we've gotten much better at that and set probably expectations on the other end of it now, where it's like, hey, it's going to be really hard. And then when it's not, it's like, oh, well, this wasn't that bad, right? You know how that works. It'd be like 100%. Saying, hey, weight loss is super easy. And then they get in there and it's like, this is really hard. It's like, I'd rather say you're gonna have to work your butt off. I mean, you have to do a lot of things that you didn't used to have to do that you don't want to do. You're gonna have to give up some things that you like to do now that you don't want to give up. It's not going to be fun. Now, I will tell you the juice is worth the squeeze, but just prepare yourself to do a lot of things and give up a lot of things that you don't want to. And if they'll just say yes to that, that's going to put them in a much better mindset when they start that journey.
It is, I think it's one of the biggest lessons to learn in any type of, especially like coaching venture. I remember when Jason Phillips was on the podcast with his nutrition program that he talked about, and he said how many programs are out there where it's guaranteeing this 6-week transformation or 12-week transformation. And it makes it sound like, oh my God, you can look like this and then look like this. And it makes it look so easy when he's like, in reality, he asks a bunch of coaches, like, how many think it's that easy to do that? And it's all like, no, it's like, well, tell them that, like, tell them it's going to be a challenging thing. And you're actually speaking honestly and truthfully. Like, we know it's going to be a challenge of, getting in, but if you don't set those right expectations, then, going into a new venture, it's all hope, it's all energy and excitement because you are projecting out, oh my God, this is what's going to happen. Then all of a sudden the first hard day comes and you didn't expect that, like, holy shit, is this right? Am I on the right track? Like, why is this so difficult? It could be a
Right.
really challenging thing. So yeah, I'm sure that's, I think, a lesson that everybody can learn in any venture that they're doing, in any pursuit of a goal.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah. So last one here you had is, keep it simple, which is one of my favorite lines to say. And I totally understand that from there. How is this like going from kind of franchise one into 100? How has this lesson been so prevalent for you? Because obviously, as you said, already successful, many years in the business, keeping things simple and kind of to those core values. How has this kind of been deepening in this lesson for you?
Yeah, to your point, it is our fifth core value and it's our final lens on everything. And we'll say things like, well, if the part-time coach in Salt Lake City, who's franchise number 4 for the investor, is only working 2 nights a week, can they grab the iPad and run the play with integrity, right? Like that's sort of the final lens. This doesn't mean we're pandering to the lowest common denominator. I don't mean that. I just mean, is it really simple, right? And so I think what we've discovered, and we knew it, but it's become more prevalent as we're actually walking down this road, is that scale alone makes things complex. If you have the simplest process ever and you throw lots of volume on top of it, it's going to get complex. So it probably needed to be even simpler than what we had, which we thought was really simple. I mean, it's a very simple model. It's 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. You only need 130 clients to have a healthy business. You only have one coach on the floor at any given hour with 6 people. I mean, it's dead simple. People can understand it. And often we'll hear from candidates like, you know what I like about it? It's really simple. I would buy it because I can understand it.
Yes.
That's huge, right? Like that's really important from a marketing perspective. It's like we know our customer, we speak to them clearly, they know what it is. Awesome. But when you then move into running the business, it's like, okay, now you've got a couple different pieces of software. You've got the retention side, the sales side. There's a lot that goes into just making a small brick and mortar run simply. And so I think for us, it became even more evident as we scaled it, how simple it needed to be. And so we've simplified, even going from licensing and working with all these different club models from CrossFit to big tennis centers. That was complex. Moving to franchising, it's like, this is our one thing that we do really well. Here's a gap in the market. We have the perfect machine built for this gap. This is what we're doing. All our marketing goes to this one thing. That's been great. So to me, that felt very simple. But I have to remember, I'm then giving this machine to someone who knows nothing about the fitness space typically. And they haven't been entrepreneurs. So that's a skill set. And I mean, we'll teach you how to run an alloy, but we're also going to teach you how to become an entrepreneur, like the things we've already talked about on this call. So I think it's just been a revelation that it needs to be as simple as possible. And in any efforts that we make in the future, that has to be our final lens, or it's just not going to work, right? You just can't have complexity. And people recognize that when they're in that sort of, I've heard it called like warrior to worrier cycle that they're in when they're looking at taking on an entrepreneurial venture or buying a franchise as an example. I think they look at like, can I run this thing? And, when you've got people asking like, well, how many other line items of revenue do you have? It's like, okay, that's a wrong question, because like you're going to struggle to nail the first one if you've never been an entrepreneur. Like it's going to take a minute for you just to get your head and arms around just the main thing, keeping that the main thing. Let's start there. Right. Then we can add in the supplement sales and the other things that come along, ancillary revenues. Shouldn't be worried about that now, right? That's just probably what they were told to ask. But I think it's just been an eye opener again. It's sort of like the purpose thing. It's like, well, duh, I knew it, but it's more prevalent than I thought at scale. Same thing with the simplicity.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most challenging things of it is that, that devilish distraction of complexity is always available, to you. It's probably personally for you too, I would assume, like with an entrepreneurial mind, there's always new ideas. There's always things that can come in that sometimes I'm sure can be tough to, all right, stay grounded, kind of keep it simple. That's a great idea, but maybe go to that at a later time. Like, because those opportunities to think differently or think of new ideas, it comes with a little bit of a dopamine rush sometimes. Like, ooh, that's kind of cool. Should I jump with that? Or no, keep it simple.
Right. And I think that's the appeal of the 8 line items of revenue. It's like, but again, I think that goes back to the not wanting to expose yourself. If you can dabble in a bunch of half-baked things, you're never going to really finish the main thing, right? Like to plow through like the operational inefficiencies of a business and get to the other side of that and really be just great at the main thing is really freaking hard. It's much easier to be like oh, push up against it. I run into a little bit of friction. Oh, I'll just launch another thing. And a little bit of friction. Sometimes that can all be within four walls, right? Or sometimes it can be different business ventures. But I would argue that you then have like 8 half-baked either lines of revenue or have 8 half-baked businesses. And you're not ever fixing the root problem, which is probably you, because you're just running up against the same roadblocks, and then you just run off and start something new. And that probably gets to your level of incompetency, like the Peter principle. And then you go over here and it just keeps happening over and over again. It's like you end up with all these half-baked businesses, right? So breaking through that can be very difficult for people. And again, that's probably more the consummate entrepreneur. But I think even for someone who's struggling or just becoming an entrepreneur, they're excited. They're not even in that mindset. It just needs to be really simple, because all of a sudden you don't have a marketing department, compliance, legal to run emails by. It's like, no, that's all you, by the way. All that's you. And I mean, franchising gives you this massive bandwidth. I mean, if you look at the percentage of success in a franchise versus a go it on your own, it's like 5 times greater chance of success when you have like a support system, right? A platform to stand on. But it's still overwhelming for people. And so we'll just always use that as our final lens, and hopefully that'll lend well, for everyone involved as we continue to grow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so funny too, if you look at most of like the major, philosophies, texts and stuff like that of life, it's all talks more about eliminating the things that are distracting you versus adding more stuff. Like they all say it's same thing, maybe a little different framework of it, but it all kind of comes back to that, which, we can in English terms just say, keep it simple, from there.
Yep.
So
always.
Rick, so it's a question I like to close podcasts out with. It's something I've asked quite a few people about, and I'm always curious about kind of personal definitions of this, but how would you personally describe living the strongest version of yourself?
Strongest version of yourself. That's a great question. I don't know, man. I think it goes back to the purpose idea. I really do. I feel like we've really beat this dead horse. But pick something. I don't care what it is. It might just be getting to a fitter place if you're really out of shape and improving your health, but that might be aiming really high. But that's it. That would be my advice, at least from my life experiences, is aim as high as you possibly can. Shoot for personal excellence in every part of your life that you feel is feasible. And, bring everything you have to bear to each one of those goals. And you know what? You might not reach whatever what you might conceive as ideal. I will tell you that goalpost is going to move anyway. So that's maybe not as important as the fact that you're just moving in that direction. And you'll be infinitely better off whether you reach that perceived milestone or not, if you just aim high and move in that direction. So I think for me, that's life. And that can be in your personal life. It could be as a spouse, as a parent, as a partner, even as an employee. If you're working somewhere now and you have aspirations to be an entrepreneur, it could be that. Be the best employee. Be indispensable as an employee. Do that. Like it's better than the alternative, right? Which is to be useless at the end of the day. You don't want to be that guy, right? We just did a podcast recently that'll come out as like, is college worth it? And it's like, in some cases, yes, but you should make a deal with yourself. And maybe this is part of the same idea, which is if you're going to pivot away from something, make yourself a deal where you're only going to pivot away if you move into something that's as, if not more difficult than what you're currently doing, right? And I don't care if that's business. If you don't want to go to college, fine. The only way that you can't go to college is if you're going to promise yourself that you're going to do something as difficult, if not more difficult outside of that. But what you don't want to do is be a 20-year-old in your mom's basement, which can manifest itself into a 40-year-old. And I don't know any more miserable people than useless 40-year-olds that started out as useless 20-year-olds, right? It's even less cute at 40 than it was at 20. Not cute either way. Don't be that person. And the only way to do it is to, again, make your bed, clean up your room, whatever those things are. Start with something small, aim as high as you can, move in that direction. You'll be much happier and infinitely better off if you do.
Perfect. Rick Mayo, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate it. So pumped for all the success that you're doing. I know it's only going to keep expanding. So I'm sure we'll do this again as the milestones continuously build up. But again, thanks so much for taking the time and speaking to me today.
It was my pleasure, Michael. Listen, same to you. Congrats on your early success. Keep going. And I'm a fan. I'm watching from afar. So I'm cheering you on. And I would love to do this again when we're at 200 and you're doing what you're doing, a million podcast followers. We'll go from there.
Go. That's it. Perfect.
All right, my friend.
If people are interested in checking more out, this resonates with them, they want to check more about Alloy, where's the best place that they can go and see your stuff?
alloyfranchise.com. You can message me there, or you can find me anywhere on social media. Rick Mayo everywhere, basically.
Perfect. Rick, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.